So she started like twitching and shaking all over, and then she just slumped over, completely unconscious. And I was like, see, this is why I don't watch Pokemon.
Oh.
There's not a show on television that's worth that.
Yeah, no, seizures are never fun.
Well, maybe. There are a few shows that might be worth that, but Pokemon's not one of them. Hi, folks. Welcome to Pop Fizzle. I'm Jeff.
I'm Heidi.
And we're here today very excited because in just a few short hours, we are going to go see
Black Panther.
That's right. So we're super excited about Black Panther. Have been, really, since we saw Captain America Civil War.
Yep, and then the first teaser that came out for this, we were in.
Yeah, so we've been excited for a while. We bought our tickets in advance so that we were ready to go and see it. We're going to see it tonight, and then as soon as we get home, we are going to set this camera up again, and we're going to do a non-spoiler review.
Yep.
It's going to be a very brief non-spoiler review. We're just going to give you our basic thoughts without any spoilers, and then we'll also film a spoilery longer discussion about the movie, and that one will be clearly labeled so you will know which one's spoiler and which one's non-spoiler. So don't watch the spoiler one until you've seen the movie, but we do want to take the opportunity to talk about it, and if you've gone to see it by the time you come across that video, then you can join us and hear what we have to say about it without worrying about the spoilers. So what we wanted to do today is talk a little bit about Black Panther because I grew up, at least from the age of 11 on, which is many years ago now. Thank you. Reading comic books. And Marvel comics were really the comics that drew me in early on. First through G.I. Joe comics, because I was a big fan of the toy line, and seeing a comic book based on that was super cool for me, and so I got into that. But then I would buy those packs, and used to it would be like in Toys R Us or in a Walmart or something, and they'd have sometimes even a grocery store would have them, but they'd be the pack of like 4 or 5 comics, and usually they were second printings or something, but they would put or extras if they didn't sell through, but they would package them together at a cheaper cost, and you'd get 4 or 5 comics for whatever it was they charged for them. And so as I began to pick those up to try to get more G.I. Joe comics, I would get a Spider-Man comic, I'd get an X-Men comic, and I knew who these superheroes were, and I'd watched the cartoons and stuff. I just never read the comics. So as I got into them, it kind of became one of my passions, which is why we think about pop culture, so you don't have to, because it's just kind of part of our lives anyway. But for me, comics became a big thing. Now for you, you had kind of a different path into nerd culture.
I definitely did, and so I never actually got into comics. However, I love TV, and I watched all of the X-Men stuff on TV. I watched all of the Batman stuff on TV. Animated series. So, whatever was on, the afternoon lineups, because I did try to switch between when there were a couple channels doing it. Was not a beneficiary of cable as growing up, so I did not actually get more TV than a lot of people, but I still made it worth what it was. So, and then everything that was Saturday morning lineups, I would watch all of that too. So I'm very familiar with a lot of the comic book storylines thanks to that, and then getting to know Jeff as we were dating and engaged and married, I've learned lots more about the comics. Still haven't read very much of them, but I know a lot of the storylines, so that's kind of me. But Black Panther was something new for me. I mean, I knew of him, but I didn't know anything about him when he came into the Captain America Civil War picture. So, but it was super cool to see him. It was super cool to see what he could do and kind of be interested in the history of what was going on with Wakanda and its culture. So,
for sure too, with Captain America Civil War, I think because Spider-Man also debuted in that movie, it would have been really easy for Black Panther to be overshadowed because so much of that deal was a new thing for us. Like nobody ever thought that deal would go through, where Sony and Marvel would work together in that fashion, and so there were a lot of eyes on Spider-Man. So it is much to Chadwick Boseman's credit and to the credit of the writers and the way that was handled, that you left that theater being just as excited about the introduction of Black Panther as you were Tom Holland as Spider-Man. And so that to me I thought was an amazing accomplishment on their part. For me, Black Panther was a character that I was familiar with sort of in passing. You know, I'd pick up random issues and maybe Black Panther would be appearing in an Avengers
like a
book.
guest star, sort of.
Right. And so I would pick up bits and pieces kind of the lore. But I'll be honest, I've probably never bought a Black Panther comic, at least willingly, that didn't come in like a package set like that. Not because I don't like the character, but because it was never my focus. You know, when I first started, it was all Spider-Man, X-Men. That's where my heart was. That's what I was into. As I got a little bit older, then Flash and Batman and some DC stuff crept in. And then I got to know more about the Avengers, and that crept in. So I had my favorites, and as a kid, I didn't have the money to branch out and try other things to see if I liked them. So for a long time, my only sort of reference for the Black Panther was when he would appear in the Fantastic Four, or he would appear in Avengers, or whatever. Even to this day, most of my personal knowledge, as far as stuff that I've read, comes from Avengers comics, because he was a large part of Brian Michael Bendis. You know, I've mentioned to you several times, one of my favorite writers there at Marvel. He's no longer with Marvel, but he was a staple there for almost 20 years. Yeah. So Brian Michael Bendis made a team, or basically a grouping of people that he referred to as the Illuminati. So they were the representative sort of each corner of the Marvel Universe. So you had Reed Richards, you had Tony Stark, you had Namor because he represented Atlantis, you had Black Panther because he represented Wakanda, you had Stephen Strange because he represented sort of all the mystic arts. You had Professor X because he represented mutant kind. So you had all these representatives sort of different cultures, and when big sort of world impacting events would happen, they would get together and kind of decide among themselves how to proceed, and then they would go to their respective groups and then proceed accordingly without those teams or groups knowing that they had all pre-decided this with each other. So a little bit of a controversy there once they were found out. But a lot of what I know from Black Panther comes from those stories and from his time in the Avengers in the last probably 10 years. And that's as a big player. He's very much a tactician. You get that nobility of him being a king, not just when he's dealing with Wakandan issues, but just as a man. He's very determined. He knows what he thinks is right, and he pursues it. There's a whole storyline running through one of the Avengers series and you played the game that was based on the incursions and all that stuff. So when that storyline was happening, he and Namor basically ended up on opposite sides of some issues and did some pretty terrible things to each other and to each other's people until it was an all-out war, basically. And at one point, Black Panther pretty much tried to take Namor out, because Namor was a problem. Yeah. So he's once he decides something, he pursues it and is all in. But what we want to talk about is kind of the history of Black Panther. Now, we'll be up front because we're a new channel, and so there are probably a million other resources for this. And I know some other sites are doing some Black Panther specific things, so be sure and check out, I think Comic Pop has something up, so check out their site where they go through some old Black Panther comics. And then I think Variant did something where it's just the history of Black Panther. So lots of good people that we admire and that we watch that have some information for you as well, probably a little more in-depth and detailed. This is more just Heidi and I kind of talking with each other, because Heidi, like Heidi said, going into it, she's a little bit less familiar. Yeah. So some of the basics, like most Marvel Comics characters that are, staples sort of in the Marvel Cinematic Universe these days, Black Panther was created by Stan Lee and by Jack Kirby. His original design was hilarious. Not at all as cool and sleek and awesome as his current design. But he was created in 1966, and his original sort of story, there are elements of it that we've seen in the MCU, because like most of what happens in the MCU, they take bits and pieces of comic book lore and they kind of twist it or turn it in a way that makes it fit the MCU that they've built. So a few differences in that early on in Black Panther lore, his father T'Chaka, who we got to meet in Civil War, was killed by Ulysses Klaue. Ulysses Klaue we met in Age of Ultron.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
So there's a little bit of a disconnect there, in that he was very much a part of the death of King T'Chaka, and then T'Challa, of course, rose to power as the king after that. But in the MCU, of course, they made Klaue part of the Age of Ultron. Just a brief sort of introduction, and then he'll be a bigger part of this movie, as we've seen in the trailer. So a little bit of a difference there. Upon King T'Chaka's death, T'Challa wasn't fully confident of his abilities as the Black Panther. The Black Panther is sort of a responsibility and a mantle that's worn by whoever leads the people of Wakanda. And so King T'Chaka had been Black Panther before, and that's also a little bit different. We didn't see that. So we may find out in this movie that King T'Chaka had been a Black Panther.
Yeah, I think that it was alluded to in several of the trailers, or at least one or two of them, I seem to recall.
Right, so for T'Challa then to step into that role, he felt like he needed to be tested to make sure that he was worthy of that mantle. And what he did then was he basically invited the Fantastic Four to visit Wakanda and then attacked them. This is one of those story tropes of comics that people that don't read comics are kind of like, why are there always good guys fighting? There's always a misunderstanding or some sort of reason that isn't revealed until toward the end of the fight.
I mean, I get it, but yeah.
But yeah, so basically he attacks them to see, because they're kind of the premier superhero team of the Marvel universe, and so they're often referred to as Marvel's first family, and so he basically tests his mettle against the Fantastic Four. Then we had there were a whole run of books throughout his history leading up into sort of the modern era. But it's important to note that he was named and created before the rise of the Black Panther organization. So I think sometimes people hear the name and they think that there's a connection there. There's not. Okay. Also that because we're talking 1966, he was definitely one of the more prominent African American characters to ever hit in comics. It would be a while, I think, after 1966. I'm not sure. I think it was in the early 70s that John Stewart, the Green Lantern, became a thing. Luke Cage, I think, was around. He
early
was
70s also.
Yeah, he was early 70s, and then I think a little bit earlier than that was the Falcon. I'm not sure who came first, whether it was Falcon or Black Panther, but definitely some early representation for African Americans in comics. And for all of the sort of trouble within comicdom sometimes and fandom, the fact that characters like Black Panther and Luke Cage and Storm and these characters were introduced kind of in the hotbed of some controversy and some issues in the civil rights, just barely post civil rights movement, and yet that they became such popular, long-lasting, highly respected characters. I think that's awesome.
Super
and
cool.
So as a kid, I grew up. Not only did I grow up in a family where racism wasn't an issue, and in sort of a cultural setting where racism wasn't that much of an issue, it also was cool that I was into comics because I was always reading about African American superheroes, and I was reading about female superheroes, and I was reading about and some of my favorite characters were females, and some of my favorite characters were African American because I was being exposed to them in comics, and it was fun stuff. So I think that's a great thing that's been a part of the comics community for a long time, and it's kind of a continuing thing that there's a lot of representation and a lot of stuff happening in comics. But for Black Panther, he went through a long string of different creators tackling his character, and then weaving in and out of books. So if Black Panther didn't have a book on the stands that was dedicated strictly to him, then he would pop up in Fantastic Four.
He was part of a team.
He would pop up in Avengers. One of my early sort of runs of Avengers that I read, Black Panther was not an official member of the team, I think, but he was there a lot. And so a big part, as you know, of the Black Panther lore is Wakanda, which you mentioned earlier, and that we hopefully will see more of in this film. Clearly, that's the case from the trailers, and it looks like it'll be a big part of Infinity War as well. Wakanda, what makes Wakanda special is that long ago, a meteor fell into that specific region that contained the metal that we call vibranium. And vibranium is a precious and very limited resource. But it also gave rise to a sort of a technology-based, like ahead of the curve sort of society within Wakanda. And Wakanda, in order to keep its resource safe, has sort of secluded itself and kept itself hidden from the rest of the world. So interesting to see Wakanda represented in Captain America Civil War, because clearly the world knows about Wakanda.
Yeah.
But then from the trailer for Black Panther, we see that while the world may know of Wakanda, it may not necessarily know what Wakanda is.
Right.
So I think that's interesting, and I'm excited to see them explore that.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. Just seeing the everyday culture, and then of course the trappings around I guess what is the royal family of Wakanda. So looking forward to just seeing just how I know it's going to be pretty. So I'm looking forward to just seeing how the filmmakers went to about putting it together.
But in a real world setting, you could imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and some nation that you were aware of in sort of a vague sense, you know, and you know, that's true of everybody everywhere. You know, we sort of focus on our own culture and our own area of the globe, and then, you know, and we know some things about the areas outside, but not a lot. But imagine tomorrow, let's just randomly say, you know, imagine that tomorrow we woke up and there was a news report about how, you know, somebody sent a news team to France, and there were flying cars in France, and there were all these things, all this technology and all this stuff that we don't have, that somehow France manages to have, and they have kept it hidden for
decades,
you know, or centuries even. Yeah, that would be weird, and it would be like, how did they keep that safe, and why are they hiding it, and what is, you know, there's a lot of questions that would be asked about that. I think that's kind of the cool thing about Wakanda, is that it exists in Africa. It's not, you know, it's not necessarily an unknown location. Now, how to get there may be unknown. I don't know how they're going to handle that in the MCU. I know that, you know, as with most things in comics, these things kind of come and go. You know, origins change from year to year depending on who's writing the story. Whether people know where Wakanda is or don't know where Wakanda is changes from creative team to creative team. That's just one of those things as a comics fan you have to learn to adapt to.
So we're gonna see how the MCU actually handles that.
Right, and the MCU, as we said, kind of has its own continuity. It kind of has its own stuff going for it, and so it'll be exciting to see how they tackle that. We know that when Civil War ended, that Steve Rogers was in Wakanda. We know that he had taken Bucky to Wakanda. And the Winter Soldier, who was missing his arm by the end of that movie, spoilers, sorry.
I was going to say, spoilers.
Had elected to go back into hibernation, or go back into sleep mode, in order to
keep everyone safe.
Yeah, because he wasn't sure if somebody could still control him, and so that was sort of his. So we ended sort of with that going on, and we know that some of Infinity War from those trailers is going to take place in Wakanda. So I'm very curious about if we're going to see any progress from point A to point B in this movie, since it falls in between, or if that'll just be saved for like an end credit teaser or something.
Definitely curious about who else will be showing up in this movie, if anybody, and of course the end credit trailer teaser things. I don't understand how anybody actually walks out after the end of a movie.
We've talked about this before.
We see them in the theaters. We're sitting there waiting for the 2 end credit scenes, and people are just walking out. I'm like, how do you not know?
Yeah, don't you even Marvel, bro? Now, for one thing you may not know is that for a while, T'Challa's sister Shuri was the Black Panther. I think we're going to meet Shuri in this movie.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like she seems to have the same sort of skill set.
Yeah, and in the comics, there were certainly times where, as sort of the person ruling and in charge of everything, she did not necessarily agree with the things that T'Challa was doing, so that was a fun sort of element for the comics to play with. So we'll see, I guess, as we go forward. clearly already we know this is going to be a big hit. It's pre-sold tons.
Oh
It's
my
getting
gosh.
great reviews already from the people that saw it early. Metacritic scores high, Rotten Tomatoes scores high. Not that those are necessarily a huge factor, but I mean, you like to know going into something that other people have already enjoyed it and said good things about it. So we will let you know what we think tonight as soon as we get back. Now, I don't know when I'll get it uploaded, but I will probably be up late into the night or early into the morning to get it edited and put together for you, and we will make that happen. So we hope that you come back and check out our non-spoiler review whenever it's up, and then after you've seen the movie, check out our spoiler review so that you can get involved in a deeper discussion about that. What do you think? Are you excited about the movie dropping tonight? Are you going to be first in line to go see it, or is it just on your radar for the weekend or next week or once the crowds die down? Where do you fall in that continuum? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you like this video,
Hit that thumbs up.
that's right. And consider subscribing. That helps us out and allows us to continue to do the things that we love to do for you, whether it's reviews or trailer reactions or some of the discussions that we have about different things like this one. We love to do those things, and you subscribing will help us do that. If you do subscribe and you want to know the next time we drop a video, just click that little bell icon and it'll let you know as soon as we drop something new. Until next time, folks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.